Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Forged in the Spirit podcast. I'm happy that we're starting our second season now. It's a whole new season for the podcast. And just with things going on in the world and things going on in my life, it was just kind of time to seek a new direction. So I'm excited for this first episode. I'm with somebody that I have been dying to have on here, and just schedules and things don't work out as good as you would like. But today I have Nick Billingsley with me, born and raised in Franklin, graduated in 2012 from Franklin High School, and then graduated from Westminster College. Nick worked for Enterprise Rental Car before landing at Christ United Methodist Church as a full-time technologies director. He's now transitioning from his role in the church to a new job at Pathways Adolescent Center, which is for at-risk youth in our area. Here he hopes to expand his passion of mentoring and working with youth. He coaches basketball in several ways from 1st to 7th grade, with his main responsibility in the 7th grade boys basketball program. In addition, he's involved with several mentorship opportunities at Central Elementary, which is elementary school here in Franklin, spending time in the building with building relationships with boys through the school. In October of 2022, he married the former Rachel Anderson, beautiful woman of faith. They currently live in Rocky Grove along with their two dogs, Munson and Winnie. Together, they share a passion for youth in the local area and expecting their first child in October. Nick, I just want to say thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really, like you said, this has been a while in the making. So,
yeah, it's ever since I heard about your speech at a men's breakfast, I actually talked to the guy I had last time on the podcast, and we were talking about the men's breakfast. So
nice.
I wasn't there for your speech, but I heard all about it.
Okay.
And sharing your faith story. And then I got to hear you at the Good Friday men's breakfast this past year. You did a phenomenal job.
Oh, thank you.
Talking about the story of the cross and really driving it home. And really, when my favorite part was when you looked at the youth and told them about how much they're worth and everything like that. And, something that I can appreciate as a former youth pastor. So I just want to thank you for doing what you did. And so I just want you to start at the beginning.
Sure.
Growing up, what your faith was like, what all the things you went through in school. I'll just turn the mic over to you.
Okay.
Let you expand on your life and upbringing.
Sure. So I grew up in Franklin, as you said in the introduction there. I think minus a year where my dad had a job in the Pittsburgh area, I've spent my entire life in this area. Grew up out on Porter Road, a little bit off of Georgetown, right by the Nicklin Church. My grandpa still lives there. Ended up on Pone Lane, and then I spent most of my adolescent years down on Elk Street, down on the river by the old 7th Street School. For me, it's important when I tell my story, as far back as I can remember, at least personally can remember, I've struggled with pretty serious depression. My parents tell stories of how that was just kind of who I was and part of who I was for as long as they knew. So it's something I've always dealt with. It's something that's still ongoing, but it's important when I tell my story to make sure I acknowledge that's been there for a long time. I think they started having me reach out and talk to some different counselors and stuff as early as like 8 or 10 years old. So there's not many times in my life I don't remember having to deal with depression. So it's really become a part of who I am, for better or worse. But it's given me an opportunity to kind of use that. With that, I certainly don't want to make it seem like I was a genius in school, but early on in elementary school, I didn't ever feel very challenged. So if a young boy's not challenged in school, they kind of resort to screwing around and being the class clown, and unfortunately that became me. I can remember as far back as 2nd grade having meetings with the principals and the teachers and just always in trouble. I say this, with a smile on my face, but if it was my child, I wouldn't be as pleased. But I remember as far back as 2nd grade, I found out if you just continually flush the urinal that it would overflow, and I thought that was cool, and naturally I got called in the principal's office. So, that's clear back in 2nd grade, and that reputation unfortunately carried through most of my school years. I don't ever remember a time where I was like on the verge of being sent to alternative school, but I know later in life that my parents had talked about that was part of the discussion. I was always in trouble. I was always smart enough to know where the line was, but also dumb enough to be willing to cross it on a regular basis, both in school and with my family. So that was really who I became. I think it was probably sometime around 8th grade, maybe going into 9th grade. I started experimenting with drugs, and you and I spoke a little bit before we started this about your experiences. So you understand as well as I do when you have an addictive tendency, it's not hard to get going with that and have it take over. Unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to know you have that until you start, and I found out quickly. My friends who maybe could smoke weed or do different things like that and leave it there, I couldn't get enough, and that took over. I was very active in sports, and that really was my obsession for most of my young life. And then around middle school, they kind of evened out. They as in drugs and sports. And then by the time my senior year came, the priority unfortunately was drugs. The summer between my junior and senior year, I ended up in rehab for 30 days, inpatient rehab, and that was definitely helpful. I don't know if that I was at a time in my life where that was going to be the thing that really fixed me, if you will, but it was definitely helpful. And then about a year and a half later, maybe 2 years later, January 13th, 2013, I overdosed. I actually, my dad has quite a few medical issues, and I stole a lot of his medication, and I really had no idea what it was. I knew what the effects of it could be if I took it, so I took way too many, and I woke up 3 days later in intensive care in the hospital. Spent about 10 days in the hospital and about a half a week in a psychiatric unit, and then outpatient, intensive outpatient rehab from there. That certainly wasn't the end, unfortunately, of my substance abuse, but it was the beginning of the end, if you will. That was really the wake-up call. Unfortunately, since then, I've received a DUI. I've gone through the programs for that and have come out of that. But all those have led up to where I'm at today. And a little bit like you shared in the bio, I'm married. I have a wonderful wife who is just instrumental in keeping me in line, and I say that in a good way. But I'm accountable to her, and that's one of the best things that I could ever take out of that. And we bought a house in Rocky Grove. We've got 2 dogs, and we've got a kid on the way. So that's the fast version of my story and how I got here. So
when you were going through rehab,
mm-hmm.
what was your mental, what were you thinking back then? Contemplating things that you shouldn't, or, just you were trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
But there's just part of your humanness that says that that's the way
Yeah.
So what was your mindset like when you were going through that?
It's a tough question because, it's easy, and I think this is what happens a lot with people who don't struggle with addiction is like they look at people like myself and they say, well, why don't you just not do that? Like, why? That's a really dumb plan. Why are you doing that? And at the surface level, it's like, yeah, you're no kidding. Like, that makes sense to me too. But it's hard. It is very hard. And one of the things, and I don't say this, and I'm always very, very, very sensitive to say this, but when you go through the meetings that they call it, AA, NA, things like that, they're great programs, but a lot of it is based off of you doing the work. And I tried to do the work. I thought I could do the work on my own. And now, at where I'm at in my life now, I can look back and say, like, the biggest piece was just handing my life over to God and saying, like, I can't do this, and if I'm supposed to still be here, if there's a purpose for my life, like, I need help. So, like, as far as like what I was thinking, like, there was times where I wished, that I was dead. There was times where I wish, like, why can't I just stop doing this? There was times where I wish, like, I know this is bad and I don't care. It really just depended. But it wasn't until I truly decided I can't do anything about this. I shouldn't say that. I can do certain things about this, but if I'm going to get out of this, God's got to take over my life. And that was a big turning point for sure.
Yeah, and do you remember that? Like, do you recollect the time that you...
I do. So this was actually, and it plays into everything I was just saying. I at this point where I'm going to go with this story, I've already been to rehab. I've already overdosed. I'm living in a college, a house with my buddies. They're all good kids, good people to be around, and frankly helped save my life. But we're in college. We're over 21, and they drink on occasion, and they can do that. I couldn't successfully, but they could. But anyhow, there was a picture of like a New Year's Eve party of me and some of my buddies. Two of the guys in the picture were groomsmen of my wedding, just my friends. And I had a beer in my hand, and somehow, doesn't matter how, probably God, the grace of God, my parents saw that. And they called me and in so many words said, like, hey, this is it. We've given you chances. We've supported you. And, at that point with them, it was a zero tolerance thing. So they said, you've got a couple of days to come get your things, and you're not welcome here anymore in our home. They cut me off financially, and I remember I had a vehicle at the time, and I had no money because my parents were paying my rent because they wanted me to focus on school. I had no money, I had no job, and rent was due, and I remember I had a little over a half a tank of gas and no job. I had no job. I was driving all over trying to get applications and things in, and I just remember driving down the road, looking at the gas tank, looking at my bank account, which at its lowest had negative 6 cents in it, and I just remember praying, like, God, if this is it. Like, I'm going to be sleeping in this truck with no gas in it to go anywhere. If this is going to work out, like, I can't do this. I need you to take over. To this day, I don't understand how I got all the places I did on a half a tank of gas. I mean, I do. The Lord was in there. But it was amazing to me. I went anywhere from Grove City to Hermitage to Newcastle on a half a tank of gas in a 1991 truck that would take a full tank of gas to get to one of those places and back, and I just remember thinking, like, I don't even have a job. I don't know where to get a job. And I just remember praying, like, I can't do this. And it wasn't that exact second that things just, boom, magically. But within the next 2 weeks, I had 3 jobs. I was working 3 different jobs, all part-time. And within about 3 months, I was able to narrow it down to one job that gave me basically full-time hours. And it was not an easy time. I was working full-time and supporting myself while I was going to college. But, it was that prayer and that truck that really, that was the time where I think, you hear a lot in the meetings, like rock bottom. Like, that was where it was like, this is it. Like, I can't get any lower than this. If I'm going to make it, that's going to be it. And that was the slow start, to crawl out of that. And that was where I'm at today, is because of probably that exact moment. So
yeah, see, we were talking before this about our stories kind of meet a lot, and of course all the people listening have listened to my story a few times, but I hit that rock bottom point. I was 16 years old. Wow. And I hit my rock bottom point, and it got to the point where I just wanted it to end, because I was partying every weekend, working at a restaurant and going to high school, and high school's hard enough when you're,
oh yeah.
And that's what led me into youth mentorship was, that loss of my grandfather, the divorce of my parents. Like, it's hard to talk to people about certain things, because it's like you said, when people have addictions, they say, well, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's like, my parents, I always thought, had the best relationship. And when that was split up and it was hard on me, they're like, well, it's okay. No, it's not okay. Like, I feel like there are certain parts of me still to this day at 33 years old that I feel like I suffer with abandonment issues.
I'm sure.
Because I know how hard it was on my mom and, and my dad and everything else. And on a kid that was 8 years old at the time, and all my core memories start with my grandfather. All my core memories are with my family being together. And I wouldn't change what's going on right now in my life for anything with my stepfather and everything else. But I hit that rock bottom and I prayed to God, look, either you help me out of this or I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it was not a overnight thing. It was multiple months. And next thing I want to talk about, and something that me and Nick have in common, is I worked with Rachel at PennDOT.
You knew her better than I did before I knew her.
Yeah, and beautiful young woman, heart and soul, just cared for everybody. Always had a smile on her face, except one day I know I made her mad. And tell you the incident, we were in the back of the crew cab, and we were driving around, and I looked at, I don't even know what I said, but she had her hoodie on backwards. She put it up, but she's like, I'm just going to try not to punch you in the face. And I was like, okay, well, I hit a soft spot at some point. So, but she was so much fun to be around. And one thing that we talked about, and she knew I was a man of faith, and in her dating life, and she was like, I just want a man of God. I said, well, God's going to provide for you. And obviously she did. And she provided for you, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to share this. Today is the 11th.
Yep.
Tomorrow, me and my wife will celebrate 10 years of marriage.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay. And my whole faith journey started with her. I mean, brought me back to church, what she gave me was Christly love. Took me, a broken young child, basically, turned me into a man. And what she did for me is why I do what I do now. I tell her that all the time, and she's like, I didn't do nothing. Typical woman talk. But I want you to share a little bit of your relationship and how that's built both of you to where you're at now.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that. That's pretty nice. And congrats on your 1 day shy of your anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of where I was at 10 years ago, and I can't imagine being with Rachel, 10 years from now, Lord willing. That is a really awesome thing. But for me, when we met, I shouldn't say we met on a mission trip several years ago. And as non-creepy as I can make this, like I think I was in college and she was maybe like a freshman or in 8th grade, so I knew her, but at that time there was nothing other than she was just somebody that I knew that was on this mission trip. It's called ASP, and my mom went that year, and my mom was actually on Rachel's team. Usually about 30 to 40 people go, and they split up into teams, and each team goes to a different home and does home repair. So I remember Rachel never went to any of these meetings. Nobody knew who she was. We weren't even sure if she was going to show up that day to leave for this trip. And, she was younger than me. It wasn't really my area to console a young girl. And I looked over, my mom was like consoling her. Rachel was sobbing, like, I'm not going on this trip, this and that. And so that's when I met her. It wasn't anything crazy. And then each year, especially as we got older, I started to get to know her on ASP. She went most years. And so, I say all that to say when I really became close with her, I was already on the other side of the worst of my addiction. So I know sometimes I think she wishes that I would be more open about that, but it's also a little bit of a blessing in the sense that she didn't know me when I was at my worst. I don't think that she would love me any less, but she's only seen me on the other side of that. But I say all that to say, I met her and we got close, and obviously we got married. And substance abuse at the time wasn't an issue, but that was really the only change in me, is that I just simply wasn't dependent on drugs and alcohol. I still had tons of childhood trauma that I had never dealt with. I always just chalked it up to being a guy, and I think there's some truth into that. But I didn't express any of my emotions. I was very closed off, and you know Rachel, pretty well, and she's a very emotional person. And I don't say that in a bad way. She feels all the feelings. She's just such an emotional person. And that was just such a blessing for me because if our marriage was going to work, like I had to meet her in the middle. Like I couldn't just say, well, you're emotional, I'm not. Like that wasn't an option. I thought it would be at first, but it's just not. So with her, what really has been such a blessing is her ability to pull that out of me. She calls me emotional. She says that I'm dramatic. I think that part's a lie, but we'll agree to disagree.
I think my wife says the same.
Yeah. So, I won't argue with her. But what she has done in that regard for me is realize that, I do have emotions and that they are healthy to feel. And, and this especially probably better than me being married 10 years, but there's no emotion that I can feel or express that she thinks any differently of me. And that was big for me. I wasn't comfortable with my own emotions. So when I finally got to working through those and learning that, like, yeah, there's some ugly emotions in there, but it doesn't change how she feels. That was huge. I was already working a little bit different than you and your wife. I was already working at the church at the time when we kind of got serious. That doesn't mean that I was, an extremely holy person, but I was kind of already on my faith journey, if you will. But meeting her has kind of refined a lot of who I am and a lot of what I try to do. And she's just been such a blessing of being the complete opposite of me, which is a good thing. Yeah. She keeps me balanced. She brings out things that I need brought out. She disagrees when I'm wrong, and that's a good thing. I mean, we're not just two people that are the exact same that agree on everything, and I think that's a blessing.
Yeah, it's always good, like the magnets,
yes.
Opposites attract.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how we always were too. And while you're saying that, you said you were established at the church. Mm-hmm. Like I was not, obviously.
Sure.
I mean, my ministry started shortly, probably after we were really seriously dating when I became a youth leader. And then, of course, she got drug into it too, which, my wife's very much the opposite of me. Like if she was sitting in this room right now, she'd be okay staring at the wall while we talked.
Yes.
That's that opposites attract thing. But, as my ministry went on and I became a pulpit supply and I was talking to her and, she did have reserves about it because, I worked a lot of overtime at work and then I started doing the ministry stuff, which there's no such thing as part-time ministry. No matter what anybody says, no such thing.
I believe that.
And this is one of the church, we're at Warden Chapel, and this is one of the churches I was at. And we became family to these people, which I think helped her out. And she had her own things going on with the church and everything else that, she's open to me about. And so when I started evangelizing, she gets car sick. So to drive her everywhere I've been doesn't help. But I'm going to tell you one thing right now. Without her, I would not have the strength to do what I did. And she has built my relationship with God up because I see how much discipleship means to her coming from me. Because I remember going to a church and preaching one time and having conversations and the tears in her eyes. That was where she really realized this calling that I had. And being in technologies, you think, God, that's nothing. But it is important, especially in the age of, COVID. I mean, that's how we worshiped for a long time. And I'm sure she stuck with you through that because I'm sure that time was hard.
It was.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's neat, too, and like you said, when you get called into ministry, whatever that looks like, and I think we're all called to ministry. I think some people oftentimes think that ministry means you're a pastor, or even in my situation, you work for the church, and if you're not one of those, then you're not. And I don't agree with that, and obviously I don't think you do either. But there's a sacrifice, like you said, and part of my ministry, or the ministry that God uses through me, is basketball, and that's a sacrifice for Rachel because from the end of November to the beginning of February, I've practiced every day of the week. So after work, there's some nights I'm not home after a game till 9, and her love language is quality time. It's hard to spend quality time with somebody when you're not home. So even just her willingness to say, like, this isn't how I would prefer it, but I support you. That has been so instrumental in my journey, and it sounds similar, obviously, for you as well.
Oh, you want to talk about God winks? Here it is. So Amanda's love language is also quality time. So that's where the reserve came from when I started doing this, and like last year, I was gone every Sunday. I was gone during the weekends, doing events and everything else, and. But there's a time, like, she looks at me and says, I'm grateful for everything you do for others. And that's when I tell her, I'm grateful for what you did for me, or this wouldn't be happening. And that's where, it comes down to, plug this. You said about, you can't imagine 10 years of marriage. It's gone so fast for me.
I bet.
Okay. I told the church this past Sunday that we were celebrating 10 years. I said, it's been the most blissful 10 years of my life. And probably the hardest 30 years of hers, because she has to deal with me every day, and I'll tell you, we talk about being men of God, okay, and I'm an evangelist. I'm going to tell you, I said at the pulpit, I'll tell people that I don't know why God picked me to do this, because my humanness still shows to this day. I took a break. I was telling you about how I took a break from the podcast, and during that break, I found out I was having some health problems. My liver enzyme count was very high, and they asked me how much I drank. Well, I used that as a crutch for a long time, up until just 3 months ago, because I have a hard time getting away from the anxiety that I have. It's not as easy as people telling you get over it. So, like, to this day, do you still have issues with like I drank beer up until now. I mean, I'm not going to be afraid to say that. Are you away from that now, or is there times where?
Yeah. I mean, I am. Okay. There are times though where it's challenging. Part of what I mentioned about when Rachel and I met, and maybe the drugs and alcohol weren't the issue at the time, but like. Part of getting through that was just shutting my emotions off whatsoever.
Yeah,
You talk about your anxieties, and anxiety hasn't been as much of my issue as much as depression I mentioned at the beginning, but usually those are, one and the other as far as the way they're spoken about.
Yeah.
I had a lot of childhood trauma, and I never dealt with it. So while I am unpacking more and more about myself, like there are times where it's almost scary how like my brain just says like, you can go have a drink or you can go get high right now. And I'm in a good spot where that is not how I act, but I can see how very quickly
it could turn around.
Yes, absolutely.
And how do you find the best way to get away from that? Like, you have them thoughts. What do you do?
So for me, the one thing that really helped change me is physical activity. I don't do well sitting still in general. It's just not who I am. In a way, you're still, or I'm still escaping, but I would consider it maybe more of a healthy escape. For some people, physical activity is like, no, thank you. I'd rather die than have to go on a hike or a bike ride. And I get that. Like, I mean, that's how people are. But for me, it's finding something that you enjoy, a healthy outlet, and pouring into that. And for me, like right now, that's bike riding. I like to get on the bike and just ride for hours. I know people who that's music, or there's artists out there. So for me to say it's exercise, that might not be somebody's thing. But God gives us talents. He gives us things that we enjoy. He gave us the ability to feel pleasure. Find healthy ways and things that you enjoy and pour into them. And I guess one thing, if I can, to suggest too, is it can't be just like I find pleasure into or enjoyment into working with these at-risk youth. That can't be my escape to escape myself. I have to do things that work on me so that I can do that. And I know a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too. In order to escape your problems, you pour yourself into somebody else. And on the surface, everyone's proud of you, and that person might even benefit from it, but you're still not dealing with your own issues. So when I say find things that you enjoy and find things that are that bring you pleasure, it has to be something that brings you pleasure. It has to be something that fulfills you, so that you can go and fulfill others. So
yeah, I was just watching American Sniper yesterday.
That's a good one.
And that's how he got over his issues, was helping them other veterans. And you say that, and it's true, because I enjoy ministry. I mean, I enjoy going to churches and speaking and doing this stuff. And, one thing that I did to try and escape was this podcast.
Yeah.
And that's why I got burnt out, though, because I was pouring so much into it to try and take away my job into another job. Well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
And I think, like, me and my wife love music. We love movies. Like, concerts are my escape for sure. Not so much Amanda's. Her escape is into the fantasy world of, like, Lord of the Rings and things.
Nice.
So we'll take a whole Saturday and sit and watch all the movies. 12 hours long, just sit there, enjoy the company, eat, and just do that. We do like the hike and stuff, which I agree, because there are still times I want to slip back into a lifestyle that's addictive, because it's an easy escape. It's easy to get your hands on, especially now in today's society. You can just walk into a dispensary and
it's nuts,
and walk into a beer distributor and just go right to town, but it's not healthy. And my body now knows that, and I know that in my head. Okay, well, my addiction and my escape has now done harm to myself. And beyond the mental side of things, So, talking about at-risk youth, a lot of people listening to this might not know what Pathways Center is. Can you expand on that and kind of what you're trying to bring to that program as a young person with these youth and going through the experiences you did? Probably very similar to what is going on with them.
So I guess to start, if you don't know what Pathways is, Pathways, I think it's Adolescence Center. I haven't actually started there, so maybe asking me again in a month, I'll have a better answer. But I do know, quite a bit, and basically what it is it's a group home or a juvenile facility for court-ordered youth. I think the ages, when I interviewed, they said maybe 11 to 19 or 13 to 19, somewhere in there. You get the idea. But it's all court-ordered. So whether truancy court has come in, whether CYS has gotten involved, whether probation has gotten involved, a judge sentences these youth to Pathways. They live there full-time. It's right in Rule City. And so for me, what really draws me to that, I was never in a group home situation, but truthfully, I think that was by the grace of God. I look back on the things I've done in my life, and I oftentimes wonder, like, well, how didn't I end up in those situations? I can't give you an answer other than the Lord didn't think it was needed to be part of my story. So for me, in my story of doing all the same things these kids that are ending up there did, just not ending up there. Part of my goal, part of what I believe the Lord is calling me to right now, is to meet them there. You can't prevent all those kids from going there. As much as we would love to sit down with all these kids that are, quote, at risk and say, hey, you're on your way to here. A lot of times they don't hear that. So for me, it's meeting those kids there, and it's not a Christian organization, so there has to be some parameters in place, as far as what I do. But my heart is to just to show them the hope that I have, and you said you wanted me to have a verse, right? And we'll get into that there at the end. But my life was full of lack of hope for such a long time. And I look at all these youth, and I say I look at them because I was able to work at Central the last year with a lot of at-risk boys, and there's not a lot of hope in their lives, and that makes me sad. And so part of what I think God is calling me to do is to give them hope, not in me, but in Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. So part of what I'm excited to do is to meet them in there and I'm sure will be times where I am, quote, preaching to them, but there's often going to be times where they just need to see somebody. They don't know what's different about this person, but they know, like, that's somebody I want to be like, or that's somebody I want to be around. And for kids in those situations at that age, sometimes that's all they need, is just somebody to know, and then they'll come back years later and say, hey, do you remember me, and you did this to me and changed my life. And then you can have those deeper conversations. But for me, it's just, simply put, I want to pour into kids to help prevent them from going down the path that I went down. And not that you can't come back from that path, because I'm here, but the quicker you can change that trajectory, the better chance those kids have.
Yeah, the healthier it is for
Yes.
your mental and physical health, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and we can get into that verse now. The conversation's been great, but one thing I want to do for this season is ask all the guests for their favorite verse. So, Nick, I want to know your favorite verse. I want to know why. I want to know the story behind it. I want to know it all, man.
I appreciate that. So I'm reading it here because I don't want to mess it up, but just know that this is on my heart all the time. It's 1 Peter 3:15. It says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." So for me, the big part of that verse is always be ready to give a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason of the hope that is in you. And I just alluded to that earlier, and we live in a broken world, and these kids that I'm meeting at Pathways come from broken homes. They are broken people. We all are. As a Christian, as somebody who's given my life to the Lord, my hope is not that this world's going to get better. There's things that we all can do to make it a little bit better, but we live in a world that's broken and full of sin. So for me, the first part is, people aren't going to ask you for the reason that you have hope if you aren't able to display that. So part of it for me is showing up and caring about these people, these kids, going above and beyond to make sure they know that they are seen and heard and felt. But part of it is, not being afraid to say, like, my hope isn't in this world. I have hope that Rachel and I have an awesome marriage and we live forever and our kids are healthy and I can hope in that. But the reality of it is things are going to go wrong, and for me to give a defense of the hope I have is that, no matter what I've done in my life, I know with all the ability that I have to know that because God sent his son, Jesus, to die on the cross for us, that we have hope in eternal life. He doesn't give us hope in this world. He gives us hope in eternal life. So that verse is on me, and it's always on my mind because the more in tune I am with that, the more opportunities I find where God's like, hey, time to share some hope with this person or that person, and I just can't emphasize enough the hope isn't in this world. We can do things to make this world a better place and more enjoyable while we're here. But my goal and my hope and with as much knowledge and understanding as I have is my hope is in Jesus Christ and that he died on the cross so that I can have eternal life. And I'm ready to give a defense to that at any point, and I'm ready to share that with a lot of youth and adolescents that don't have any hope in their life. So
yeah, that's the big thing. Nobody's perfect, including us, and that was one thing when I was going through my issues was, I'm never going to see my grandfather again. I'm never going to feel that love again. And that's where I think it's 1 Thessalonians tells us, we'll see each other again. The veil will be taken away. And that's what gives me my hope, that as a believer in the cross, that those who have gone before me will rise before me and we'll be together again. And that's hope too. It is hope. It's not because every day, like we just shared before, we were supposed to get together 2 days ago. And just things didn't work out.
Yep.
And that's just life. Things don't work out. And I shared with you, I've just had a a bad week, and there's times where I sit on the couch and I stare out the window and I think, why is this going wrong? It's just the way of the world. I mean, losing family members to disease. You shared that your dad has some medical problems, and I've seen a lot of people die of cancer, and you think that that's such a terrible thing, but sin, when it entered the world, didn't promise us a perfect world. And, and the hope that you have, like you said, that we have eternal life is what drives me past the point of, well, I just lost my grandfather to cancer. Well, my hope is he's with Jesus, and I'll be there too. And he doesn't want me to go tomorrow or soon. He wants me to live a good life here and share the gospel, like you said. This has been very powerful, man.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad that we finally got together. And I'm sure there will be other times. I'm sure there'll be more things that come up. I just want to say one thing you said about riding bikes, and I seen you and Rachel rode. One day. And, for being a pregnant woman, I'm sure that was not easy, but
it was her idea too. And she's a pretty active person and pretty strong-willed, as I'm sure working with her. So she said she wanted to do that. We went to Oil City and had breakfast and coffee and came back, and it wasn't that I didn't think she could do it. I just thought, boy, are you sure that's a long morning? But she wanted to. We did it, and it was awesome. It ties back into that quality time. Just spending time, her and I, and that's her love language, and I certainly understand that, and I enjoy doing things where it's just her and I. So
Yeah, and I know you'll have a great marriage. She's a wonderful woman. You're
a
wonderful guy.
Oh, thank you.
I can't wait to see where God takes you next. So I just want to say thanks again.
Thank you.
I'm sure the audience will love this. So.
I hope so. I enjoyed this. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Just want to say I pray for every one of you. I see your views. I see your comments. I talk to you, get to know you. Always open on email and the website. Get a hold of me if you ever want to speak. I'm sure I can forward questions to Nick, have him on again, and so I just want to say I love you all. Thank you for listening, and until next week, be safe, and just pray for all the military personnel, emergency people. I pray for you and your families. I'm sure we all have our problems and unspoken requests, so always have you all in mind. Love you all.